Let's kick this off. So thank you to those of you who are joining by video. I'm Sarah, content lead at Product Hunt. One of my favorite things to do here is to talk about trends in tech. So I'm pleased to be joined by our panel today to talk about connected apps. We're partnering with Snowflake to help lead the discussion today. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Emily Dillon from the applications team over at Snowflake to introduce the panel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. We're excited to be here today. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Emily. I lead product marketing for applications at Snowflake, and really excited to be hosting this wonderful panel with leaders of some of the fastest growing startups out there right now. So would love to start off with introductions before we dive into the meat of the session. So George, why don't we kick it off with you? Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing more about Supergrain?
Sure. Hi, my name is George. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Supergreen. Supergreen is a customer engagement platform built natively for the Snowflake Data Cloud. We are a connected application, which is one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We connect directly to the customer's Snowflake instance and help them send customized, personalized email messages, SMS messages, and push notifications across all of their customers.
Wonderful. Thank you, George. And Soumyadeb, how about you and Rudderstack?
Hey, I'm Soumyadeb. I'm the founder and CEO at Rudderstack. And just like Supergrain, I mean, we are building a customer data platform on top of a data warehouse, which involves like a tool to collect all the customer data, create the customer 360 on the warehouse, and then activating that data. So it's very much like a connected app on top of Snowflake. So really, I'm really excited to be here to be talking about that.
Great. And Esther, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing more about Anecdotes AI?
Sure. So I'm Esther. I'm the head of information security at Anecdotes. Anecdotes basically empower compliance leaders by giving them a centralized solution for all of their needs, which we call it the Compliance OS. It leverages data to power different compliance applications from risk management, audit management, policies, and so on. And the automation and data really alleviate most of the challenges we're going to talk about today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. Each of your companies represent different spaces, but what brings us all together is this concept of connected applications. And that's what we're going to be digging into today throughout this conversation. So what we mean by connected applications, I think just for folks who are tuning in and going to be watching this recording, traditionally SaaS vendors have stored and processed customer data in their own data platforms. And I think in the last few years, we've really seen this trend emerging of SaaS vendors actually instead meeting their customers where they are, storing and processing data and providing analytics within the customer's own data platform. And so it's this emergence of essentially a new deployment model of how SaaS is delivered to the customer. So to start out, would love to dig into the weeds a little bit about what this looks like for each of your organizations and how it might vary across them. So Soumyadeb, would love to start with you. Can you give us an overview of what does it look like for Rudderstack to be a connected application and deliver and kind of engage with customers in that way?
Yeah. So at a very high level, we are like a customer data platform, right? So what that means is like our customers, which are typically B2C companies, but also like B2B companies, they use Rudderstack to collect data about their customers. So let's say I'm a consumer e-commerce company and I have a mobile app and a website, and I want to collect all the engagement that happens on those properties, right? I want to collect that data and bring into one central place, and then do things with that data, right? And what I mean by things is build simple analytical applications to more advanced ML applications and so on. And so that's kind of the next step beyond data collection. You build these analytics to ML applications, and then you want to activate that data back, right? So for example, if you compute some kind of a churn score or like a lead score, you want to use that to drive your sales engagement and your marketing engagements and so on. So you're kind of putting together this architecture where you're collecting the data, building these things on top of that data, and then activating that data back into different tools for the final engagement with the customer, right? So traditionally, so this is what is called a CDP. Traditionally, most CDP vendors have been selling this as a SaaS solution. So right, it's kind of like a black box SaaS solution that like marketeers can come in and like create audiences and activate that data. But there are a couple of challenges with that SaaS approach, right? Firstly is like you lose control over that data, right? Now your entire customer data is locked into a third-party SaaS, and like, is that like a good long-term strategy, right? And then with like a lot of focus around data privacy and data governance and so on, like that becomes a challenge. The second thing is like the kind of applications that you can build on top of that data, right? So when everything is locked into a SaaS vendor, then you're kind of limited by the interface they expose to that data. Like it's typically limited to like their UI, and like they'll only let you create audiences. So you cannot like connect like some kind of a BI tool and generate reports. You cannot like point to your ML algorithms and do more advanced stuff, right? So that's again the second challenge. And the third challenge is like the completeness of data, right? Your CDP will only collect so much about your customers. So you always have additional data pipelines to bring that data around. Getting all that data into a SaaS becomes a challenge, right? Running those pipelines. It is much easier to build this thing on top of a data warehouse, right? So that's why we are kind of like seeing this shift when organizations, both like mid-market and larger companies, are trying to put together this entire stack of like data collection, all these advanced use cases and activation on top of a data warehouse. And that's what we mean by like a connected app CDP or a CDP on a data warehouse.
That's really helpful. And I think that framing of there's three things that the customer really gains from this deployment model, and that you're seeing: one, increased control over their data; two, flexibility of how they can actually utilize that data. They're not locked into just the UI of the SaaS vendor. And third, the completeness of their data. I think, you know, being a data-driven company, every company has some aspect of their mission state anchored in on that, or their data team does. And having, you know, a comprehensive view of the business of the customer is key to that. George, Esther, I'm curious for kind of how deploying as a connected application might be similar or different to what Soumyadeb described at Rudderstack.
Yeah, for Supergrain, a lot of the same themes that Soumyadeb mentioned apply to us as well. We enable customers to send personalized customer communications to their customers via SMS, email, push notifications, as I mentioned. Every single company in the world needs to communicate to their customers. And in order to stand out, what we're seeing more and more is that they need access to more data to personalize those messages. And so when there is a customer 360 that is already established with every single customer touch point, rather than just a sliver of data that you're sending to a third-party SaaS vendor through a separate pipeline, then the marketer in our case is able to use a lot more information to make those messages a lot more personalized and deliver better customer experiences to their users. Now, just to add on to maybe one thing that Soumyadeb mentioned, which is in addition to the pipelines that you move, that you use to send data to the SaaS tool, you also need to move data back. And so we provide analytics on the campaigns themselves, and a lot of our users, who are marketers in this case, need to understand the effectiveness and ROI of the campaigns that they're running on key business metrics. And again, those metric definitions and the underlying data sets that power those metric calculations also live inside of Snowflake. So because we have a direct connection to Snowflake via the connected app model, we're able to provide richer analytics, more comprehensive analytics that leverage all the data that they have already stored without, you know, the customer needing to build separate pipelines, API integrations to move data back and forth.
That's helpful. And Esther, I'm curious, kind of switching gears more on the security and privacy side, and within that space, what does it look like for you?
So at Anecdotes, we actually started building the connected app alongside the managed app from day one. We enable our customers to delegate their data. We also allow our customers to leverage their data for security compliance purposes, obviously. And with the connected app, customers essentially, they use Anecdotes as data processor by connecting their data to our system through the plugins we offer. The data is processed in our side through Anecdotes, but eventually stored in their perimeter. And this allows our customers to, be in control of their data and maintain the level of security that they have designed, while they're still being able to enjoy all of the benefits and features that we are offer as a company.
That's helpful. In particular, it's interesting to hear kind of you started out building bolt deployment models, which I think is in line with what we're seeing of figuring out ways to meet customers where they are and kind of tailor how you engage with them. I'm curious, Esther, given that you've kind of always supported these dual deployment models, what kind of has been the motivator of this trend, do you think, towards connected applications and towards customers saying, can you actually, connect into my data platform rather than storing it all within your own?
I believe that the data belongs to our customers and they should be able to remain in control of it. And if we're looking in the industry, we realize that achieving, for example, SOC 2 compliance isn't necessarily enough. And companies today want to be, in control of their data as much as they can, because this is the way that they can build trust with vendors or customers. It's both sides. So while we're giving the customers the ability to maintain control, it brings the customer the ability to sell to bigger companies and build that trust faster. In addition to that, customers, they have privacy requirements and policies that are in a higher standard with that. So basically, yeah, this is it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think customer control and being able to, again, you're not asking customers to move their data to you. Their data is also not locked in a SaaS vendor. Instead, it's kind of staying within their control, which opens up new possibilities analytically, but also allows them to have, apply their own security and privacy standards and controls around that data is really important. I'm curious, George and Soumyadeb, do you see other factors kind of coming into play as we see more and more companies start to adopt a connected application model?
I mean, one thing that also comes in is like the cost. So particularly with like customer data, like the volume can be enormous, right, for a consumer brand. And if you're tracking like every click and every event that is happening in your app, right, you're talking about like billions of impressions and so on. So when you are kind of storing it on a SaaS vendor, they are probably internally storing it on top of like Snowflake or some kind of a storage environment, and then they have to charge like 70-80% margin on top of that, right? So then that cost becomes non-trivial, as opposed to like where this runs when customer takes care of the data storage in Snowflake, right? I mean, then we don't have to keep that margin, right? We are purely a software vendor in that sense. So that also is another factor we kind of see with our customers.
Yeah, and for us, one thing we see is that data teams, especially who are already working in Snowflake, they've adopted the so-called modern data stack, and which is essentially a set of tools and technologies around cloud data warehouse and Snowflake that allow them to manage their data better. And what that means is a lot of times these data teams now have a lot of outsized influence on the marketing technologies that their companies choose.
Yeah.
So when it comes to adopting another customer engagement platform, which Supergrain is one, then the choice becomes really easy when you can choose between a product that integrates natively with their existing tools versus one that doesn't. And I think very related to that is just the time to implementation. So normally, again, because building pipelines is so time intensive, so costly, these implementations can take months, if not quarters. Whereas working with a connected app like Supergrain brings a lot of that time down to weeks, sometimes even days.
I think that's a great point. In fact, like the influence that the data teams or the engineering teams are having in the tool sets being used by other teams, whether it's product, whether it's marketing, I think that also plays a very, very important role, right, in like getting this connected app model deployed. Earlier, marketing would say that, okay, I'll buy another SaaS tool and then like solve my pain point. But then finally, the data team still has to build integrations into those tools, right? I mean, where is the data team or the engineering team? Like they would have to like run those pipelines into those third-party tools, and they are now questioning, right? Why do we send everything outside and build another, like where we have all the data in a data warehouse anyway? So I think that is also playing a big important role, like the central role that engineering takes, right? And it has always happened, right? I mean, like companies like the Amazons and the Apples of the world, right? They're always very engineering driven, but like mainstream companies we see are also kind of becoming that, where like the engineering teams play a much more central role in the tool sets getting deployed. So
that's interesting, both in terms of, well, in terms of your go-to-market strategy. Do you consider kind of the data teams one of the primary personas then you're selling and marketing to, alongside kind of the traditional buyer personas, so security leaders, marketing leaders?
And for us, it is 100% engineering teams. And we talk to for a smaller company, it would be the CTO or the head of engineering. For a larger company, it is the head of data, like CDO or chief data officer. And so, yeah, very much the data teams. And we see that, like, and they are having a lot of this influence on like what tools and how data gets into marketing team things. So like, yeah, that connected app model really resonates well with them, because they're not just thinking for a pure marketing use case. When they're looking for a solution, they're also looking for, I need to do like at some point data science, even if I don't have the team today. Like, so I think they care a lot more about data ownership and the right architectures.
Yeah, I would say the same for us, where a lot of our initial conversations actually occur with the data teams because they already are familiar with Snowflake. They really understand the value propositions of the connected app model. And then they are just happen to be working with an internal marketing stakeholder and looking for a solution, and we're able to bridge those conversations. And again, these conversations are ones that we would have to have anyway, because the data team inevitably gets brought into the conversation to approve the technology. We're able to short circuit a lot of that because they're able to become aware of what we're doing earlier on in the process.
Yeah, and for us, of course, it opens a new market because we actually can do business with companies that usually don't allow to share the data externally of their company, and it's a big win.
Got it. So for Esther, for that looks something like you're able to sell to larger companies or companies who have even tighter security controls that don't allow them to traditionally move data or maintain data in, an external account. And so by connecting them, you're able to essentially say, hey, let me get rid of that concern around data control and security. You're going to keep complete control. So it's allowing you to kind of enter new customer segments.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So we've talked about kind of the importance of the role of the data team in the buying process and decision process, and the impact they feel of this deployment model. It is incredibly advantageous to them. They're not building all these pipelines. I'm curious though, for your end consumer, the folks who are actually kind of using your app day to day, what does the impact of using a connected deployment model look like for them? Like maybe for Supergrain, for instance. Does the marketer know that there's a difference, George, between if you were, a managed app versus a connected app?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the details are abstracted away from the end user, in this case, the marketing team. They benefit from some of the things that we talked about, which is better reporting. So, in very specifically in a dashboard that we would show, instead of just showing opens and clicks from their email campaign, we can actually tie in revenue and LTV conversions and other business metrics that are calculated on top of Snowflake, for example. And that's just something that existing products aren't really able to do because they don't have access to the data. So the marketer benefits in that way. Another example of this would be, because there doesn't need to be pipelines to move data to a third-party platform, then the marketer has direct access. So they can essentially self-serve when they use our segmentation builder to create the business logic they want, instead of the current workflow, which is they have to work with the data team, write a custom SQL query, upload that CSV up into a third-party platform. And so that becomes a bottleneck that they don't have to deal with anymore.
Got it. That's helpful to hear as well. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think building that, going back to what Soumyadeb started with, of you have the completeness of your data, that ends up being the benefit and that thread that goes all the way through to kind of the end user who is using your UI itself. And then the data team also doesn't have that fear of lock-in because they have all of the data in one place rather than continuing to fragment data across SaaS vendors. I'm curious, I think, Esther, just kind of on a final note of the impact as far as how it impacts go-to-market. You mentioned a little bit about how achieving compliance like SOC 2 isn't necessarily enough for some customers. Can you share a little bit more about what the connected application deployment model delivers in terms of trust and security to customers and how that might have changed the conversation?
Of course. So that currently, for example, SOC 2 is very common in the SaaS world to build this trust we're talking about. But since it became so common and so obvious, and even it's becoming easier to achieve, still bigger companies have this like conflict if it's enough or not. And when they're doing due diligence on companies, especially on startup companies, it's always harder to compete with, I will say, the old school companies because they have more resources, more teams, that more dedicated, professionals that are working on, I would say, security and privacy of that specific company. So we as a startup and other startups here, while building this, kind of methodology from the beginning, it's actually creating a statement from day one that we are taking very care of our customers' data and we're not playing around with it. And by providing this solution is like taking, as you said before, this concern from the table from the beginning. And just, let's talk about business and let's put this concern aside. We are taking care of you and you can control your data. And it's I'm circling the point that we really believe that the data belongs to our customers and this is how it should be. And if you ask me, this is how it will be in the future as well.
Yeah, I'll just add here. I mean, it's actually a big thing for us as well, right? I mean, we can sell into like healthcare vendors, healthcare startups. We are HIPAA compliant, and because we don't store any data and everything goes into the customer environment, like that path was really easy for us compared to other SaaS competitors, like where they have to go through much more pain to show that they're HIPAA compliant, right? So that was another thing which really helped us on the go-to-market side as well.
Yeah. Plus one to that, we're able to sidestep a lot of the security questions because we're able to say that we're not storing customer data. In most examples, typically there is a very big tension between the end user of SaaS products that rely on customer data and the security or compliance teams that have to restrict access to that data. So there's constantly this dance, especially in more regulated industries like fintech and healthcare. And so in some of our conversations, we see that the marketers, even if the products that they use technically can support their use cases and give them access to data, there's internal company security policies that prevent them from doing so, just because the data has to leave their existing data platform, and we're able to thread the needle there.
Wonderful. I think this is a perfect segue to perhaps the most exciting part of this conversation, which is your hot takes about the future. I mean, Esther, you already came out the gate saying you think, in the future, what we're going to see is, all SaaS companies will start to recognize the customer data as the customers. But I'd be curious, kind of, what are each of your future hypotheses about where SaaS is heading in terms of data infrastructure and deployment models?
So I must say again that I think the data will be eventually held only by customers, and vendors will be just, on the logic side of the app, because I think it's the only way to really handle security and specifically privacy issues. For example, GDPR and CCPA. So soon every state will have, a privacy act in the US. And the way to win it, it's not by, complying to each act. It's by eventually let the companies store their data and manage it by themselves. So that's from my end.
I can go next. So I think it's kind of funny that we'll probably come a full circle, right? If you go back to the 90s, then we had this on-prem deployment model, right, where you are buying oracles and databases and you're running your software stack and everything is in your data center. And from there we went to complete SaaS, where okay, now you have Salesforce where your data and your logic, everything is in cloud and you do not have any control, right? And we'll come back to that the Oracle world, except that now it's not your data center, but your data is in Snowflake or some kind of a cloud data warehouse, and then your business logic runs on top. Could be coming from different vendors, but it is running in cloud but in your control, and it's kind of connecting to the data, which is again in your control, right? So it's kind of going back to that pre-SaaS world. And I think there are engineering challenges to be solved there, and companies like us and Supergrain and everyone else is kind of addressing that. But yeah, I think that's what is the future, and that has a lot of the benefits that we're talking about in this context.
One of the features I think of SaaS today and the current state of SaaS is APIs. Every SaaS vendor has to build a way to ingest data and export data to and from a number of other partners. And so there's kind of this ecosystem where it's almost expected that you have to build integrations with 20, 30, 40 different vendors, and that's a big that customers look for that. And I'm looking forward to a world in which the API disappear, not as a feature, but just represented differently, because all the data is already in one place. And so you don't need to even go through this motion of copying data from one platform to another, from SaaS tool 1 to 2 to 3. And that just becomes table stakes for everybody on day one. And I think the connected app model will help shift that thinking. And I'm just excited for a world in which we're not kind of talking about our integrations, because that's just something that that everyone can take for granted.
And it will really drive innovation. Think of it where your customer data is standardized. If your CRM Salesforce data is in a standard format in your warehouse, so you can literally spin up one application, one CRM, and if you don't like it, you go to another CRM and it connects to your same data source and so on. I think that would be amazing. That will make it really. Salesforce is their UI is not the best, right? I mean, they haven't compared to a lot of other tools, but nobody can move out of Salesforce because your data is already in a CRM. But in a world where your data is standardized in a warehouse that different apps can connect to, I think it'd be really easy to disrupt vendors. That's generally good for consumers as well.
Wonderful. Well, I think that is a great note to end on. Data Twitter hot takes, you heard them here first. Esther, Soumyadeb, George, Sarah, thank you all so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to share about your business, your insights, and your hypotheses for the future. If you have any questions for folks who are watching this or tuning in, we'll make sure to include social links so you can connect with Esther, Soumyadeb, and George on whatever channel they happen to be on. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.